I think I'm going to turn this one over to Ansley. Ansley Mick, our director of our political action committee as well as our state policy. Ansley directs that. There are some bills on this slide. I mean, I'd be happy to talk about them, but I also know that you'd rather hear Ansley's voice than mine. So I'm going to turn it over to Ansley, if you wouldn't mind, to talk about some bills on this slide.
Sure. The LB 218 and LB 488 were heard in the Natural Resources Committee last week, and Don Beatty was kind enough to come share testimony on both of those. Both were Senator Groney's bills, and one of them especially was a little disconcerting because it changed kind of the legal interpretation of groundwater, and would have shifted it to kind of a similar scenario in how mineral rights are exchanged when land is sold, and when you're granted, you're granted use of groundwater when you own the land. You're not granted the water itself. It doesn't follow you, and there are some concerns there. Jay Rempe did some analysis, and like I said, Don Beatty testified. The other was a change to the Water Sustainability Fund that kind of we thought maybe could be construed to take the department kind of out of some of the decision making when it comes to distributing funds out of the Water Sustainability Fund. And again, I think it's sort of in some cases, a solution in search of a problem. LB 452 was a bill from Senator Lindstrom. It's similar in some ways. It doesn't generate quite as much revenue as Senator Breezy's LB 312, but Senator Lindstrom wanted to expand this. He's trying to expand the sales tax base. This bill actually used the expansion of the sales tax base to pay for income tax relief. And so we sent a letter to the committee on LB 452 and just said that we believe if the sales tax base is going to be expanded, we think the revenue should be directed to property tax relief. LB 657 and 660 were heard also in the Natural Resources Committee. Senator Wayne introduced those bills, and the public power folks had a very good conversation with Senator Wayne, and he suggested that he introduce them simply to start a conversation about how we distribute power in the state. The Farm Bureau testified in opposition, in kind of generally speaking, our policy book supports the public power system, and we currently have very affordable and reliable service. Our situation in Nebraska, although it continues to be studied and looked at, and I know in some ways criticized, to have the power, the reliable and affordable power we do in rural Nebraska is pretty unusual. I mean, our state is pretty rural and remote in a lot of ways, and not every state can say the same. And then finally, in the Appropriations Committee, we had Ron Wallman, a veterinarian from Seward, come in and testify in opposition to some proposed cuts to the state veterinary office. Actually, most of the cattlemen did as well. Obviously, the Department of Ag testified in opposition. The Department of Ag was kind of forced to cut 8% of its general fund budget, and they, historically speaking, have proposed cutting the animal industry staff, and they did so again because they didn't have much of a choice. But what we're going to say is, and so what happens usually is they propose this cut, and then the Appropriations Committee puts it back in, understanding that health and welfare of livestock in the state is pretty critical when it comes to food safety and consumer confidence and trade. So we usually don't cut that. We've gotten rumors that the Appropriations Committee is actually looking at sustaining those cuts, which is unfortunate, especially considering the Department of Ag is run, more than 40% of that department is operated off of user fees. So ag is truly an industry that pays for itself in a lot of ways, and I don't venture to guess there are a lot of agencies that can say the same. So an 8% cut to the general fund budget of the Department of Ag is quite significant. What we're going to ask the Appropriations Committee to do, and Senator Stinner, who is the chairman, to do, is look at just giving the Department of Ag some flexibility to cut in different places. Please, as the committee, shouldn't tell the Department of Ag where to cut, especially if it's coming from the animal industry staff. So, some of those funds are user fees, and they're a combination of user fees and general funds. So maybe there's some ways that the Department of Ag can kind of make those cuts in ways that it wouldn't be felt so heavily by the industry, and like I said, threaten a lot of things that we take pride in. So